Will you all join me in prayer? Come, Spirit, come. Fall fresh upon us as we hear these ancient stories and listen for their call in our times. And guide us in our wrestling of the biggest questions, O God, and help us to know you are here. Amen. So friends, today we wrap up our series focused on the topic of outsiders and on God's special concern for those on the fringes of society. And we have been doing this work in order to continue to develop a more Christ-like compassion for and engagement with marginalized groups in our community and beyond. In particular, during this sacred season of Pride. Now, today we consider the call to love and welcome the outsider as we also celebrate a very special anniversary in the life of this community. Because this year marks the 30th anniversary of this congregation voting to become open and affirming. And I want to make sure we're all really clear on exactly what that act of becoming an open and affirming congregation meant. Becoming an open and affirming congregation meant that Magnolia United Church of Christ made a public, documented covenant welcoming all people, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, into the full life and leadership of that church. That meant that members of the LGBTQ plus community could participate equally in all aspects of church life, including membership, leadership roles, marriage, and ordination. And very, very importantly, voting to become affirming meant that the church actively celebrated and supported LGBTQ plus individuals rather than just tolerating their presence. Now in 1996, that was a long, long time ago, right? So I just want to put 30 years ago in context for what it was like in the LGBTQ plus community, even here in progressive Seattle at that time, and I'm just going to speak from my own personal experience. Now, around that time, Jasper and I had been denied housing because of our sexual orientation by 3 different potential landlords. We had no protections in the workplace. We both could have been fired at a moment's notice for being gay, with no recourse. Physical violence against the LGBTQ plus community was common. The number of places within Seattle at that time that I would have considered safe or where we could find sanctuary as a couple, I could number on one hand. For our non-sanctioned wedding ceremony, because that was before we were allowed to legally marry, the Unitarians were the only denomination that would host our service within their building. Now for that service, again, the vast majority of my family chose not to attend. And for the reception, we walked this tightrope of will they or won't they reject us with all of our vendors. And the vast majority of the vendors rejected us. Now, in the 1990s, societal opinions against the LGBTQ plus community were heavily rooted in religious conservatism and the fallout of the AIDS crisis. Homophobia was pervasive in mainstream media, politics, and daily life. And so given that context, and since I'm kind of a history nerd, when I learned that it was in 1996 that you all voted to become open and affirming, I went back and pulled the MUCC annual reports from that year to learn a little bit more about what that process was like. Because I remembered that time from my perspective, and I wanted to learn what it was like for this community to work within that greater context, to follow the prophetic call of welcoming the outsider. And given that larger societal context, even here in progressive Seattle, I was not surprised to find that when I pulled that 1996 annual report, that I found the process to become open and affirming described as, quote, painful and difficult, unquote. And that there were folks who left this church as a result of that vote. I also found that 1996 was described by your pastor at that time as, quote, an unsettled one for many members of our church, unquote. And that the pastor at the time called on this community to, quote, continue to struggle with an issue which is clearly outside of the comfort zone of some of us, unquote. But I also learned that this community, after a time of learning and discernment, which was spearheaded by an open and affirming committee led by the late Ken Schubert, who had on his team Dave Moberly, Maureen McLean, Virginia Mason, and Stu Williamson, did move forward with a recommendation to the congregation to become open and affirming. And the end result was that vote of approval by the congregation to become an open and affirming church within the United Church of Christ. And of note, at that time, MUCC became one of only 180 of the 6,100 UCC churches nationwide to take that bold and prophetic stance. One of only 180. And again, in 1996, that was pretty darn out there. Now, even today, 30 years later, only around 40% of all Christian churches perform same-sex weddings, allow LGBTQ plus ordination, and have inclusive membership policies. Much less were doing it back in 1996. There are congregations right now that are dealing with this very same painful and difficult process in our community. The same process that MUCC took on in 1996. And there continue to be so many in the LGBTQ plus community who have either been painfully rejected by Christian communities or who have never, ever found a welcoming and affirming sacred community. But because this community decided to continue a process that was, quote, painful and difficult, it has offered something different. Over the years, you have welcomed LGBTQ plus clergy and staff, and they have felt welcomed and safe here. Same-sex weddings have been performed here, and lesbian brides in poofy Cinderella gowns have been walked down this sanctuary aisle by the proudest fathers you can imagine. And individuals have seen that now permanent pride flag that has been installed outside the bell tower and felt safe coming into our doors off the street, knowing that this would be a place of sanctuary and that they would be welcomed, just based on a flag this size. That all happened because this community discerned a way forward based on big, bold love, even though it was painful and difficult, and even though there were costs. And perhaps more importantly, that all continues to happen because this community continues to discern a way forward based on big, beautiful love. The work of welcoming the outsider continues to need to be done today and tomorrow and the next day. Unfortunately, there will always be outsiders. And there will always need to be prophetic and courageous communities willing to provide radical welcome to those outsiders. There will always need to be prophetic and courageous communities willing to go against societal and cultural norms and extend loving and welcoming arms and open doors. There will always need to be prophetic and courageous communities willing to practice big, bold love, the kind Jesus taught and modeled and lived and died for. So today we celebrate the work that was done 30 years ago, and we acknowledge the work that continues to need to be done today and tomorrow. Today we celebrate the courage that was needed to provide sanctuary at a time when so very few were opening their doors or their hearts. And most importantly, today we celebrate that in providing radical welcome to all outsiders, we provide a place where all are able to be seen for their authentic selves, where all are seen in their unique glory, where all are seen for their true colors. And we celebrate the faithfulness of this congregation's big, bold love, even in and maybe especially in the current climate in this country. And I want to end this meditation with a real personal note of thanks for the courage and boldness and prophetic beauty of this congregation 30 years ago. At a time when places of sanctuary were so few and far between for folks like me and so many people special to me, y'all stepped up and you offered a different witness to the world. You opened your arms and your hearts and your doors when so very few people did. And I thank you for that so very deeply. Now we're going to end this meditation with Michael singing a very special song. And it is called True Colors. And you can find the words in your bulletin. Now this song is about being seen in all of our authenticity for who we truly are, and being radically and unconditionally loved for who we are. And that is so very important, because when we see people in their beautiful and authentic selves, in their true colors, there are no outcasts. There are no outsiders. Being an open and affirming congregation means that within these walls and within these hearts, we try to see each other and to see all for their beautiful, authentic selves. Being an open and affirming congregation means that within these walls and within these hearts, there are no outsiders. We are all seen in our own unique glory. We are all seen for our own true colors. So I'm going to encourage you to read along with the words in your bulletin if you want, or close your eyes and listen as Michael sings the song. But as they sing this song, I want you to imagine that it is this congregation that is singing with that big, bold love to any community or person that may be on the outside needing love and sanctuary, including any of us, because we have all been there. And there is nothing more welcoming and healing than being seen for our true colors.